So to those of you who are already here, welcome to our next Clarktoberfest session. The subject is BIPOC and First-Gen communities. We're really excited to have you here. And just so you all know, my name is Christopher Munoz-Colleen. I'm Assistant Director of Admissions for Access and Inclusion at Clark. And in this session, it's really a continuation of a session that we had earlier in the month, BIPOC and First-Gen resources. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to see it or you want to see it again, there's a recording on the Clarktoberfest website. So we might reference some things that are from that session, and that's a great kind of next place to look. But for this panel, we wanted to ask the question, what are some communities here that students of color and first-generation college students have formed? And if I'm a prospective student, what is it really like to be at Clark, and how can I get involved if I did come here? So just so all of you know, this session is primarily a Q&A. So after our panelists introduce themselves, we're really going to let you steer all of us. So you can actually begin right now by entering your questions in the Q&A, and really do that throughout the webinar. Like, you're welcome as questions come up for you to put those in. If you have a technical issue, let us know in the chat below, please. So if you suddenly can't see us or hear us, the chat's the place to let us know that. But we will first start with introductions from our panelists. So let's start with Khadijah. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So hello, everyone. My name is Khadijah. I am an international student from Germany. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a junior at Clark, and I'm also a first generation student. As you can see here, these are some of the things that I'm part of, but academically, I currently major in political science with a concentration in international relations and minor in philosophy with a concentration in ethics and public policy. Outside of work in academics, I am currently the publicity chair of BSU, which is the Black Student Union on campus. Especially this year, we have been extremely active, have been trying to do some virtual events, but also some events in person. Of course, we all wear masks and are social distancing. So as of recently, we had a protest on campus, which was super supportive. It was a great thing to be part of. And I was super glad to be able to not only plan this, but to also be part of that very historical moment, actually. And it's very nice to be able to unite in that moment and just to fight for racial justice. And then I also want to highlight Sisters in Stride, which is a affinity space that is created of the MFGSS office, which is the Multicultural First Generation Student Support Center. And Sisters in Stride is primarily for women of color. And we just meet usually once a week and just talk about how we've been doing, just be there for one another, empower each other, and also just educate one another. So usually every week we would sit down and then just talk about what are some topics that we want to know more about. And then there's a group who would introduce that topic each week. So we also educate one another, which is awesome. So it's more like a student to student, more relationship. As I mentioned, I'm also an international student. So I'm also more or less part of ISA. So I work a lot with them, but I mainly work with them through ISRC, which is the International Student Rights Coalition. So we also meet once a week, talk about how, especially right now in the pandemic, where a lot of us can't go home, can support each other best. So as of right now, we're planning to do a little fun Christmas get together for those who stay here over the break. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Great, thank you. So with that, we'll turn it over to Alex. So Alex, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. That's actually, that's, as you can see, that's not a picture of me. That's actually a picture of the organization that I'm about to introduce. But anyway, my name is Alex Nazaire. I go by Nupt or Alex on campus. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a junior at Clark. I'm currently majoring in combined languages, those being Spanish and Chinese. And I'm originally from Maryland and Haiti, but I grew up overseas in Rwanda and Cameroon, so I like to call many different places home. Outside of admissions, I'm a former athlete. I used to play basketball and tennis. Also a former resident advisor in a first-year hall. I took part in Focus, which is very similar to SIS, Sisters in Strides that Khadijah introduced, where it's a bi-weekly meeting for male identifying students of color. I also participated in ACE down below, which is a 2-week pre-orientation education program, where we got exposed to several different resources on campus, such as different staff and faculty, got to kind of get used to the academic workload on campus and our way around the campus, as well as making a lot of friends early on, which really helped. I also serve in student council as an equity and inclusion representative, where I'm advocating for minorities and underrepresented populations on campus. And a lot of my time I spend actually working in multicultural organizations. So I'm part of Black Student Union along with Khadijah, Latin American Student Organization along with Dominica, and the one I'm most affiliated with on campus is definitely the Caribbean African Student Association. As you can see, that's a picture right there of our e-board, I think around, definitely before I came to this school, around maybe like 2014, 2015. So one of the reasons why I actually came to Clark was because I fell in love with the Caribbean African community that we had. As I said, I grew up overseas in Rwanda and Cameroon and Africa, and my dad's Haitian, so it's kind of like the best of both worlds to me. And I served as a first-year representative in my first year, and basically there have been a lot of different events throughout the week and on the weekends. As Khadijah mentioned, a lot has changed just given the pandemic, but Caribbean African Student Association is really known for promoting different events on campus. That's a little
Great,
bit about
thank you. All right, and Dominica, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominica, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior, and I feel so old saying it. I'm originally from Ecuador, but I was raised and lived most of my life in northern New Jersey. At Clark, I studied political science on the international relations track with a minor in biology and a concentration in law and society, which is a funky mix, which you'll see a lot of at Clark. Aside from working at admissions, I'm on the executive board for our undergraduate student council, which is our student government on campus. So I'm very involved in advocacy, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And aside from that, I'm also the vice president for the Latin American Student Organization, and also very engaged with cultural clubs like NUPT and Khadijah. But to tell you all a little bit more about my experience, I kind of think about it chronologically in terms of like how I came into Clark. So as a first year, I was very like disinterested in getting involved with any types of clubs or organizations because I was like, I'm just here to focus on academics. I don't want any clubs to be distracting me or taking up any of my time. So as a first year, I only joined LASO, the Latin American Student Organization, in order to like find some community and find an affinity space of like other folks who came from similar background, a similar background as me, and to just find, some friends casually. But LASO ended up being a really important space for me to feel a sense of community and to like help with homesickness. Like a lot of our events have to do, related to our culture. So we have a lot of events where we have food, or a lot of events where we play like music and we like reminisce on some of the things of our culture. And that was a really important space for me as a first year to help me feel acclimated. And then going into my second year, I started to feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of like extracurricular and like academic balance. And so I decided to run for a student council as what was formerly called the minority rep. And student council like wouldn't originally come into your mind in terms of like BIPOC and like first-gen students like making community, but it actually became a space for me where I was able to find a lot of folks who, as you can see on the screen, those are my fellow e-board members last year. It became a space for me where I could advocate for the things that I cared about. So for example, myself and the other representative, Eunice, who's on the right there, who was the other minority representative when I ran my sophomore year, we decided to change our position into what NUPT currently is, or Alex currently is, which is part of the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet. So we really changed kind of the culture around student council and have been advocating a lot for students of color on our campus and what students really care about. So we've also been organizing with the Black Student Union, for example, and been working with like Khadijah and a lot of other students on, advocating for students. And then I also wanted to mention Mosaic, which is a coalition of all the cultural and identity-based clubs on campus. And Mosaic was created, I think, a little bit before I got on campus, but it's a space where all of the cultural and identity-based clubs send a representative, and then we get together and talk about kind of the issues that we care about and what we'd like to advance as a collective, whether it's, talking about our different events that are going on or just issues that we'd like to address as a group and as a collective. And then I also wanted to mention Connections, which is one of our pre-orientation programs for students of color. As Alex mentioned, ACE is the other one, but Connections is a shorter program, which is for students of color to kind of feel acclimated coming into Clark, kind of get introduced into some of like the topics and issues that they might face, and helping them build community before they come in. But yeah.
Great, thank you. So now all of you watching have a sense of who our panelists are and what they've been involved with. And we really want to turn it over to you to steer us. So like I said, this is a Q&A for all of you. So feel free, starting right now, to put in your questions to our panelists. And we would love to hear what you would like us to talk about. And we actually do have a question to start, which is, how did your community shape your transition into Clark? So I think we heard a little bit about that from Dominica. So Khadijah or Alex, how did your community shape that transition starting at Clark?
Yeah, I can start on that. So one of the main organizations definitely were being with international students. So similar to Connections, we do have also a pre-orientation program for international students specifically, and just knowing like there's so many other international students, so many other also like students of color from different countries was definitely important to have. And just like knowing there are like other people who, you know, have like similar experiences to you in the classroom, who might have similar questions just as you. So like knowing those students are there for you and are ready to support you is definitely nice to know. But as of recently, and especially during the pandemic, BSU has been a great support group for me, mainly because I wasn't able to go home. So I was in Worcester this entire summer. And throughout the summer, also what Dominica already mentioned, BSU worked closely with the student council, and we're just like brainstorming ideas on like, what can we do right now to like be part of the Black Lives Matter movement in a positive way? How can we bring that kind of mindset onto campus? How can we best mobilize students in a safe and good way? So most of my time actually went into working with amazing students just like Dominica over the summer. And it was really healing for me because it just didn't feel like I was alone in this, and also knowing, okay, there all these things are going on in the world and you just feel so powerless, but just being part of this organization made me feel like, okay, there are some things that we can do. And we were able to see that within the recent events that we held on campus. So our work did pay off, and we are having a louder voice on campus, which is really amazing to see. So that definitely got me through this long summer. So I'm super grateful to be able to be in that group. So yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And how about you, Alex, that transition into Clark?
Yeah, I would want to really echo a lot of what Khadijah said, but also for me, in my experience, it was one of the reasons why I came to this school was finding the Caribbean African community. And right from the start, I joined the Black Student Union a little bit later, but joining Latin American Student Organization as well as the Caribbean African Student Association, it really helped me find friend groups from the start and make me really feel really comfortable in this school. And just, yeah, I think that just really having a friend, you know, making friend groups throughout the first year, and kind of that growing throughout the semesters, and then even bringing upon more people while other people graduate and other first years coming in, it just, you know, really builds the connections that we have here. So that was something I really appreciated. I feel like for me, it was really, the community that I got was really out of the friend groups that I had from the multicultural organizations that I joined.
Great, thank you. And we actually have a related question, which is, how did you find out about these groups? And I think, not to put you on the spot, Dominica, I think you have a really good story about the club fair, if I remember. So could you get us started with that one?
Yeah, so in a typical year, at the beginning, I think at the end of the first week of classes, there is usually a club fair where all clubs and organizations are able to have a table, usually out in our green, so very open space, and students can just pretty much walk through like our little walkways, and there's just tons of tables of all the clubs and orgs, so anything from like dance clubs to sports clubs to cultural clubs. And I always tell the story how in my first year, me and my roommate were very excited to go to the club fair, and we were looking for specifically for Lasso, for like a Latinx club. And it was just usually the clubs kind of take a section of the space. So like the dance clubs will be like on a certain side of the club fair. And so the cultural clubs are all on one side, and they were all the ones playing music very loudly and like dancing and just having a good time. And so I always remember very distinctly meeting some of the people who like kind of served as like, you know, my friends, my older friends introducing me into Clark, into what Lasso was. So that was my experience. And I signed up usually at the club fair, like all clubs will have like a sign up sheet, or like have you sign up on a like Excel sheet or something, and then they'll get your information, and then they'll reach out to you from there, and you're invited to like the general interest meeting. They tell you a little bit more about the club, and you're welcome to join it. So that was how I learned about Lasso my first year. Really, really good experience.
Yeah, that's a great story, because it's kind of like, I don't know, it always paints for me what that discovery is in the beginning when you're kind of stumbling upon groups. Yeah, and I love that, what you said about the music and the dancing. So we actually had a question from Sabrina, who said, "Hi, I know there is a South Asian Student Association at Clark. Is there an affinity group for all Asian American students?" So any of our panelists, do you know of like an affinity space for kind of a general, all-inclusive Asian American affinity space?
I know a affinity space or multicultural organization, because I know a lot of Asian Americans who take part in the ACS, the Asian Culture Society. That is where I know a lot of friends of mine have like got together originally, and kind of made their own friend groups. In terms of affinity space, I'm actually not too sure about that.
Oh, so you would say it's not like a official multicultural first-gen affinity space, but this is a student organization.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, and could you write the name in the chat below, just so if Sabrina wants to look that up. Thank you. So we had a question. This is a more general question. Can you tell us an example of an event? So I know we've heard a couple mentions of what the events could be like, but does anyone have a story about specific events so we can see that more clearly?
So one of my favorite events with BSU specifically is Black Monologues. And what that basically is to say, we usually do that once a year. And the way it would look on the planning side of things is we would just kind of like post our just like little flyers and just ask students who would want to participate in Black Monologues. And Black Monologues can really be, it's open to anyone, to any student of color, specifically Black students. And they can just like submit either their art they have made, a poem they might want to introduce, sing a song, whatever it might be. So there are like a lot of like different things on how you can be involved. So it's really just like a great creative space for you to be in. So the first like few weeks we're just like getting in submissions and like seeing like how we can have a best lineup and like finding someone to moderate. So there a lot of students can participate who might not even be in BSU. So a lot of people who aren't BSU might want to also perform, but they don't necessarily have to. So this is really open to like a lot of other students who might not be really a member, but they still want to be participating in that great event. And then the day off, we usually also invite artists and other great people from other organizations or from other schools even. So like this is also sometimes like people who are designers, who are also artists, who are just like performers who would like to perform. And it's a great event to just like come together, celebrate Black artists of like any kind. So again, this could be really just like drawing a poem, whatever it might be. And planning it definitely is a lot to like find a good lineup and like motivate students to come. But then the day off and like seeing how we like set everything up, the lights are usually beautifully made. There's so many people to support and there's so many great art to just like see and take in. And it's really worth it. So this is definitely one of my favorite events.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, kind of to give an overview of what some events are. I think the cultural clubs on our campus do a really good job of striking a balance between like very like social events and then very like meaningful events, and then like all those that fall in between. So some of my favorite ones in previous years have been, I think almost every cultural club has like one or two staple like big events of the semester. So for LASO, that's Noche Latina, which is Latin night. And we usually pick a theme every year. And the event takes place in our big banquet hall, Tilton Hall. And so every member of the Clark community is welcomed. And usually based off our theme, we're trying to like inform our community members and also like our larger Clark community about a specific issue or specific celebration in our culture. And so I like that a lot of cultural clubs have that like one big event where a lot of students come to. So I know the BSU does Kwanzaa, for example. I know that CASA has done like Rep Your Flag events, which are always fun to go to. So those are some of the events that I really like.
Yeah, for me, like, I guess it would kind of depend on which organization, because I do like appreciate a lot of different ones. Black Monologues is definitely a big one for Black Student Union. I remember once my friend was performing and he had me and a couple of other friends of mine support him on stage. It was like, it was really funny. But he performed, he did really well. It was like a crowd favorite. So definitely Black Monologues is a big one from my first year. Latin American Student Organization, definitely have to echo Noche Latina, because I also take part in the Salsa Encendida Club, and in the Salsa Encendida Club, we have a performance for salsa and bachata dances. So that's really huge, as well as the Latin American Student Organization does a performance as well. So it's really big. For Caribbean African Student Association, along with Rep Your Flag, there's also one called Casa Dinner. It's not one event, it's kind of many different events like bagged into one. And during the Casa weekend, we have a fashion show, which is really like everybody's hyping everybody up. We have also a Casa Dinner and also like a Casa Party. So it just lasts the whole entire weekend, and it's really a big one.
Great, thank you. And also, Alex, that statement of everyone is hyping everyone up just makes me think that's so like a Clark. that's very fitting for Clark. I think that's the general kind of atmosphere here, and that's really great to hear. So this is interesting. Kind of next question. Oh, okay. So this was about kind of related to this transition into college. So someone asked, what advice would you give incoming freshmen about the cultural shock? How was it? How did you deal with it? It's a great question.
Yeah, I can get started on this and echo kind of what I introduced before, which was Connections, one of the pre-orientation programs for students of color. As opposed to ACE, which is kind of more academically based, the other pre-orientation program, Connections really focuses on getting you acclimated to what it is, you know, to be a student of color coming into a predominantly white institution and kind of all of the complexities that comes with. So some part of the program, or like a majority of the program, is like these different sessions that have to do with like identity, that have to do with like dealing with imposter syndrome coming into like a predominantly white institution. Maybe if you're first gen, you know, how to be a leader on a campus where you maybe don't see a lot of leaders that look like you. So I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in a program like this, to look into those pre-orientation programs, because I think you'll definitely kind of tackle some of those issues that come with like the culture shock of coming to this campus, but also find community in people that also are going through it with you. So.
Yeah, within that, I also want to add, as someone who did the international student orientation, wasn't able to therefore do ACE or Connection, and who still like had to like really navigate through this forms of cultural shock, these same resources are still available to you even after the pre-orientation program. So although like you might have not been able to like go to any of these, the office is still open, the same resources are still available to you. So there are definitely like no wrong like questions that you can ask in that sense. So if you feel like, oh, I wish like I did have more of a community, I don't really have time for a club, but I kind of want to have those like those resources, then you can really just go to the office. The office is also just a great study space. So just like sitting there, meeting other students is also like a great way to just like meet other people who might have the same identity as you. But those are also like, there are also some great advisors who are really like willing to sit down with you and be like, hey, what is it that you're looking for? Maybe come to a workshop here or come to the event there, whatever fits best. And they also send out newsletters, so you can really keep up to date on like what events and like organizations are there for you. So if you missed the pre-orientation program for any reason, like these same resources will still guide you and like support you all through your entire like 4 years at Clark.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And this is another kind of question that's related to this group of questions. So this is, how does being in these clubs shape your daily life at Clark? I think Khadijah touched a little bit on that too, of like the spaces that we, as you know, that as students of color, you can go access and first generation students can access. But that's kind of the other end of the coin, is like there's the events going on. But what would all of you say about the kind of day-to-day impact or day-to-day experiences through your involvement with these organizations?
I think it would kind of depend on your like commitment level, because we do kind of throughout all of the different organizations, there are executive board members and then there's also general members. So for a lot of general members, mostly their participation is, aside from like a general meeting that we would have usually just once a month, in Latin American student organizations, it's every week. It's planning out different events, attending different events. So that's it's kind of a smaller engagement. Rather for executive, on the other hand, for executive board members, it could get kind of busy because you're kind of in the forefront and like the front line of the organization. So your representation, as a secretary, I take notes during the different meetings that we have. And kind of like another level up, we have our vice president here, Dominica. So that's even another level of commitment. So it would just kind of depend on not only if you are a general member of the organization, but also if you are an executive board member, what level position you have. So that's kind of my spiel of it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that outside of meetings, the more you like go to the events, no matter like how like involved you are, and like the more you like kind of like see familiar faces, it really also shapes the way you walk around on campus. So for instance, like just like getting food, like I often like see Napt on the way and then we just like talk for a minute. And it's just like, you know, fun to like see these different people that you either like plan events with or that you just like supported at some like another event. So like that's like something that I like about having a smaller community, because you just walk around campus, you say hi to people that you know, you see them in the classes, you know, like, okay, like we are in the same organization, like we know we have the same identity. If anything like happens, I know I can reach out to you and you can reach out to me. So having that underlying support just like by going to these events, or like maybe even just coming to one meeting, definitely really shapes the way that you feel on campus. And having that can really like change a lot. So I'm really happy to like still have that, even if it's in Zoom classes. So yeah.
Great, thank you. So we have another question in the Q&A, and just so you know, please feel free to keep filling in those questions. We're happy to answer them. And we have one that's a little bit related to what Khadijah was just saying. So someone is curious, what is the relationship like between older students and new students at Clark?
I was gonna say, for me, I think in my experience, especially like as it relates to cultural clubs, the upperclassmen do a lot in terms of like making you feel acclimated and welcome and kind of educating you on what has come before you. So I know for me specifically, who like I really care about like advocacy for like students of color on campus, by like having community and like having friends that have been here before me, I've learned a lot about the history of like, for example, racial organizing on campus, and have been like in terms of what we're now currently doing with like student council and the Black Student Union. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of, I don't even know how to say it, like there's a lot of help and preparation And then also just community, kind of like how Khadijah was mentioning in terms of like when you first get on campus as a first year, to like know someone who knows like their way around things is also helpful. You know, when you're trying to find like the mailroom or something like that, you have that friend that can tell you like where things are, how things work. One example that I always mention is how one of my sophomore friends when I was a first year was really good friends with the dining staff when we went into the caf. And because I was always tagging along with her, going to lunch with her, they would always say hi to me as well. And then I became very good friends with the dining staff, and that helped my experience a lot more in like the caf, when they would always like tell me where the like good fruit was, or tell me to go like to the back to get some pizza or something. So that really helped my experience, and like was because I made those connections with like upperclassmen. But yeah.
Something that culture clubs also have, I know CASA and BSU does that, is like having little siblings. So usually like it's called like BSU siblings or CASA siblings, depending on what club you're in. So firsties can also, if they're interested in being part of the club in any way, they can also just like sign up for that, and they get paid with someone, they get paired with someone who is very similar to you. So then you would have like, for instance, like I'm a junior now, so I would most likely either be paired with a first year student or a sophomore, or just someone who's like really new to the club. And then just like someone to reach out to ask questions, to, you know, what Dominica was just saying, to like get lunch with or anything like that, to also like help you to kind of like understand like, okay, this is what the club culture is like I'm here for you in case you have any questions, if you need any help with like, you know, leadership skills, whatever it might be. So we do try to like have that relationship within the club as well. But outside of these clubs, like you do also have a peer mentor who is there for you like throughout orientation. And as of recently, will also be there for you for your first semester and kind of just like guide you through your first semester, share all resources with you. So we do get trained on like all the different resources on campus to really like fit every student needs and identities. So there is another upperclassman who will be able to like also answer all of these questions, like connect you to anyone in case you like don't know like who to reach out to. Yeah.
Also, some of the, those are kind of like the main things. Also, one thing to mention also is a lot of different organizations. I know for Caribbean African Student Association, Latin American Student Organization, and Black Student Union, we all have first year representatives, which serve to connect the first years to the upperclassmen. But along with that, what Dominica and Khadijah said are mainly the ways that we go about it.
Great, thank you. So this is also a related question. So someone was curious, how did you decide to become leaders in your club? So all of you hold different positions that are kind of beyond just being a member in these clubs. So can you share more about how that happened? How did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so I kind of explained in like my chronological how I got involved, what kind of was my mentality. So definitely after I like started to feel comfortable in terms of like wanting to get more involved, I like did some soul searching, and also like by speaking with people who were like-minded and like also had similar ideas for advocacy on our campus, that's kind of what got me wanting to continue to pursue like leadership positions. So for example, having joined student council made me look back at LASSO and think, you know, I see like a higher vision for our club. I see us going in a, you know, new direction. And that is kind of what prompted me to continue to like pursue these leadership positions, this year being vice president, and alongside with the current president and like our e-board. Alex can maybe speak a little bit more about this. We've been really changing the direction of our club in terms of what like is important to us. So definitely kind of seeing advocacy in one club has helped me kind of realize that in another club. But that's been my experience with like student council and LASSO, and what has like prompted me to continue in a leadership position. I think also just like a personal passion of mine is advocacy and like activism. So that's always something that I try to like relay in like the spaces that I really care about. So I really care about student council, and I really care about LASSO, and overall I really care about you know, issues that students of color face on our campus. So that's what really like makes me excited to continue to do this work.
Yeah, to go along with what Dominica said, I think I do it for several different reasons. I think for Lasso, for sure, it's just kind of what I've seen in the past and what we feel like we could do better is really definitely something that has inspired me to join the executive board. For Black Student Union, for the protests individual, as Khadijah mentioned, to kind of be in the forefront of that and organizing all of those different parts, as well as pushing forward to meet the demands, was really big in terms of me joining the executive board for the Black Student Union. Caribbean African Student Association, I'm part of the e-board more so because I feel like I've made so many friends in that group, and I want a lot of first years to be able to come into these groups upon joining the school and having that sense of community. So it's kind of for a few different reasons.
Great, thank you. And so this is kind of related to some points earlier as well, but we mentioned Mosaic. I think, Dominica, you might have mentioned that earlier. So someone was curious how the different identity-based clubs interact with each other. And it sounds like it's through activism, but also events and even daily life. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I think it might be helpful to walk you through a typical Mosaic meeting. So usually at the beginning of our meetings, we talk about the events that we have planned individually as clubs. First of all, to avoid having major events on the same day, because we want to show up for each other's club. And I think that's a really important thing in terms of culture and how we care about each other's communities as well. So that's one way that we talk amongst ourselves. But then also when we see overlap, we try to collaborate on different events. So I know in the past, Lasso has collaborated with CASA on some of those bigger events in terms of the Rep Your Flag, or the ones that are held in the big banquet hall, not only because we want to celebrate similar things or because we see overlap in our cultures, but also to help each other out as friends and as clubs in terms of resources, in terms of getting turnout. So I think that's one way that we interact. And then the other way, and that's the first half of a Mosaic meeting. And then the second half is thinking about bigger, more institutional things, which kind of goes along with what we're talking about in terms of activism and what are the issues that matter to us, and what do we see that we'd like to change, and how can we use our collective voice to make a difference as opposed to being by ourselves. So I think that also kind of creates us a larger sense of community. Like Khadijah was saying, sometimes when you see your club member, going for lunch, you feel oh, that's someone who's part of my club, someone who might have a similar background or experience to me. But then when you see the support that there is as a collective, you kind of get that larger sense of community on our campus. But yeah, I think that's one way that Mosaic how clubs interact in terms of collaboration, events that may be social, that may be informative, but also activism, bigger issues, thinking about institutional changes. Yeah.
Yeah, and even outside of Mosaic, there's also a lot of interaction with these clubs. So for instance, just Instagram has become a big platform, especially during the pandemic, where for instance, as I said, I'm publicity chair of BSU. So I also run the Instagram with a few other members. So we often get messages from other clubs saying hey, we really want to support your work. Would you want to collaborate at this event? We plan it and you can show up, or whatever it might be. So there's also just a lot of collaboration, behind the doors in a way. Just also just having, regular friends in your dorm or everything. And your friend might be in one club, you might be in another. And just by talking about one of the things that you do, hey, maybe we should just collaborate on this, or we can book the space together and save on costs, or whatever it might be. So there's also just a lot of community and talking outside of these bigger groups. And also even with clubs not from Clark. So for instance, BSU usually talks to the BSU from Holy Cross as well. And we usually support each other in different events as well. So there's also even a larger community within Worcester, which is also awesome.
That's a really great point as well, that there's the Clark community, but also the other Worcester colleges that collaborate. And this is a question for all of you, which is, I'm trying to find a college campus that I'll feel comfortable at as a student of color. What advice do you have? So this is a prospective student on the college search. All of you were in their shoes a couple of years ago. So maybe what helped you when you were making that choice?
I think for me, it was just a lot, because I also like had the chance to like go to campus and just like see the campus. So it was a lot of how also other students reacted to me. So like when I asked questions, like what kind of help was offered to me, or like how was the overall vibe? To me, Clark always felt super like welcoming and accepting. So just like having that first impression was definitely very helpful within making my decision. But it was also just like what we talked about, just like hearing about the pre-orientation programs, hearing about all the other clubs that we have, which also just like signify to me that Clark does know that we're a prominent white institution. There's no like, we're not really trying to hide that in that sense, but at least like we're also like acknowledging that, and also then having all these clubs to support students, and all of these other events to like kind of like fill in the gaps and have that support. So just like knowing there are affinity spaces for me to join, there are clubs for me to join, there are other students who just feel like me, and like know there is a support group for me to join in case like I do sometimes feel a little bit like, I don't know, like just out of the place. Like I know that that's not like, I'm not the only one in that sense. And for me, like knowing that those supportive measures are there was enough for me. Yeah, so I'm still happy with my decision. So yeah.
Great. And actually, we had a question just now. What was your experience as a student of color in the city of Worcester?
I could start off by saying that at least in terms of when it came to like getting acclimated again, I felt very good about like with the larger Worcester community, not only because there are some aspects of it like that were homey to like me in terms of where I grew up. I loved that there's a large immigrant population in Worcester, which influences like the food scene. And I'm a big foodie. And so when I was missing home, it was nice that I could, go, like 5 minutes out and find something that tastes like home from a restaurant nearby. I also really appreciate like the different opportunities there are to engage with the community. So I actually took a class where I was able to get out into the Worcester community and put on a program for the local Worcester Public School kids that had to do with like celebrating Hispanic heritage and culture. So just the fact that there are these opportunities kind of made me feel welcomed into the larger community outside of just Clark.
That's great. Thank you. And I think looking at the clock, I think this is time to wrap up the webinar, but I'm going to just end with a quick invitation to everyone. So thank you all for joining us and writing in those questions. And just so you know, we're really happy to stay in conversation. So you're always welcome to write as questions come up for you. If you'd like to be connected with Khadijah, Dominique, or Alex to ask more questions, feel free to just let us know. You can reach us at admissions@clarku.edu. The next webinar is on the screen. And just so you know, if you attend 3 Clarktoberfest webinars, we will send you a t-shirt if you have a US mailing address. And you can tune in tomorrow actually to learn more about Worcester. That's a great bridge to hear more about what Dominica was saying. And I also wanted to end, so someone actually asked if we can get the emails of the panelists. So if you all would feel comfortable putting your emails in the chat, then the student would be able to get in touch, and anyone else. But if you lose that, just email us at clarku or admissions@clarku.edu, and we'll be happy to connect. I also want to acknowledge that there is a lot happening in the world right now, and there's a lot of demands on our screen time. So just thank you all for joining us for this hour on a Sunday. It's been really fun to answer your questions. And like we said, we're glad to stay in touch. And Khadijah, Dominica, and Alex, thank you for offering your perspectives. And it was great to see all of you again. And I hope you all have a good rest of your weekend. All right, take good care, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.